A plane ticket. One way, departing Friday. I found it folded inside my husband's gray blazer while bringing it to the dry cleaner. His name was on it. Mine was not. I stood in our bedroom holding that small piece of paper for a long time. The radiator ticked. The dog scratched at the door downstairs. Outside, November rain tapped against the window like it was asking to come in. I read it again, then a third time, as if the letters might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. My husband and I had been married for 38 years. We met at a church picnic in 1986 when I was 24, and he spilled lemonade on my white skirt and apologized so earnestly, so thoroughly, that I laughed instead of being angry. We raised 2 children in this house. We buried his mother and then mine. We survived a miscarriage, a layoff, a cancer scare that turned out to be nothing, and one very bad year when we barely spoke and slept on opposite sides of the bed, as though a wall had grown between us. We survived all of that, 38 years. And now I was holding a plane ticket with only his name on it. I set it back exactly where I'd found it, refolded it along the same creases, slid it back into the inner pocket of the blazer. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and thought about what kind of woman I was going to be in the next few days. I had noticed things over the past month. Small things. I'd dismissed one by one, the way you dismiss individual clouds when you don't want to believe a storm is coming. He'd started taking phone calls in the garage. Not every call, just some of them. He'd come back inside with a neutral expression, the kind of neutral that takes effort to maintain. He'd begun checking his email at odd hours, tilting the screen slightly away from me, not dramatically, just enough. And twice he'd said he was running to the hardware store and come back 45 minutes later without anything in his hands. I told myself I was being paranoid. I was 62 years old. I had a tendency, my daughter always said, to build narratives out of coincidences. She got that observation from her father. But the ticket was not a coincidence. The ticket was a fact. I didn't confront him. I want to explain why, because I think people assume that confrontation is the brave thing, the right thing, the thing a woman with self-respect would do immediately. Maybe they're right. But I had been wrong before badly, embarrassingly wrong about a surprise birthday party he'd been planning when I accused him of forgetting our anniversary entirely. I had cried. I had said things. And then 30 of our friends had jumped out from behind the furniture in our living room and I had to pretend my red eyes were allergies. I needed to know before I said a word. That same week, I found out about the reunion. I wasn't snooping. Not exactly. I was looking for the car insurance card in his desk drawer. He'd asked me to scan it for the mechanic when I saw the printed email. 40 years. Hartwell College, class of 1984, annual reunion weekend. November 14th through 16th. Lakewood Conference Center, Vermont. Friday through Sunday. The same dates as the ticket. My husband had gone to Hartwell for 2 years before transferring. He didn't talk about it much. I knew he had friends there, people he'd stayed loosely in touch with, names that appeared occasionally in Christmas cards. I knew there'd been a woman he dated briefly before me, someone named Patricia, though I'd never met her, and he'd mentioned her exactly twice in 38 years, both times in the context of other stories, casually, the way you mention furniture in a room you no longer live in. He had never mentioned this reunion, not once, not a word. I went to the Hartwell reunion website that night after he fell asleep. The event was open to alumni and their spouses. It said so clearly on the registration page, "Spouses and partners welcome." He had not registered me. I sat with my laptop in the kitchen with a cup of cold tea and I felt something move through me that I can only describe as a kind of grief. Not rage. Not yet. Something quieter and more frightening than rage. The feeling of looking at something familiar and suddenly not recognizing it. I did not sleep well for 4 days. On the 5th day, I made a decision. My neighbor's youngest daughter, Kristen, manages events at a hotel. We've known her since she was 7 years old, when she used to collect earthworms in our backyard after rain and name them. She is 29 now, competent, discreet, and she owes me a favor I've never collected, for watching her apartment and her cat for 3 weeks when she had a family emergency 2 years ago. I called her on a Tuesday morning. I explained only as much as I needed to. I told her I wanted to attend an event at the Lakewood Conference Center in Vermont without being recognized. I told her my husband would be there and that I needed to understand something before I decided what to do about it. She was quiet for a moment, Then she said, "Are you sure you want to know?" I said I was. She said, "Okay. I know the event coordinator up there. They always need extra staff for these big reunion weekends. Let me make a call." By Thursday afternoon, I had a name tag that said Carol, volunteer staff, and a navy blue polo shirt 2 sizes too large. I drove to Vermont alone on Friday morning. 5 hours. I listened to the same 3 songs on repeat without meaning to, just forgetting to skip them. The leaves were mostly gone, but a few maples still held their red. The mountains looked like something painted by someone in a hurry. The Lakewood Conference Center was a large converted inn, white clapboard, black shutters, the kind of place that had been quietly elegant for 100 years. I checked into a small motel 6 miles away under my maiden name Margaret Hollis, which I hadn't used since 1986 and felt strange to write, like signing someone else's autograph. I changed into the polo shirt, pulled my hair back into a bun I never wore, and put on the reading glasses I only used at home, thick-framed tortoiseshells that my daughter said made me look like a college professor. I drove back to the conference center and parked in the staff lot. The event coordinator, a brisk young woman named Dana who spoke in complete logistical sentences, handed me a clipboard and told me I'd be helping with the registration table from 4 to 6, then assisting with drink service during the cocktail hour. I nodded. I said, "Perfect." My voice came out steadier than I expected. He arrived at 4:47. I was standing behind the registration table, slightly to the left, half hidden by a pillar and a large floral arrangement that smelled like eucalyptus. I saw him before he saw the table. He was wearing the navy sport coat I'd given him 2 Christmases ago, and he looked tired in the way he always looked tired after a long drive, shoulders slightly forward, eyes doing that thing where they search for somewhere to land. He checked in with the volunteer at the center of the table, not me. She gave him his lanyard. He thanked her. Then he turned and stood in the lobby and looked around the room. His face did something I hadn't expected. It relaxed. Not the way a person relaxes when they're getting away with something. The way a person relaxes when they've walked into a room full of old photographs. Something private and a little sad and warm all at once. I looked down at my clipboard. The cocktail hour began at 6 in the long room overlooking the lake. By then I had traded the clipboard for a tray of white wine glasses and was moving through the crowd slowly, the way I'd watched servers move at parties for 40 years, looking at everything and nothing. I found him near the windows, standing with 2 men around his age and a woman I didn't recognize. She was perhaps 60, silver-haired, with the kind of posture that suggested she'd been told to stand up straight as a child and had never stopped. She was laughing at something one of the men said. My husband was laughing too. It was his real laugh, not his polite laugh. I knew the difference. I moved closer, slowly, stopping to offer wine to people along the way. The silver-haired woman touched my husband's arm, not his shoulder, his arm, briefly, the way old friends do when making a point. She said something I couldn't hear. He nodded seriously, then said something back. She pressed her lips together, the expression of someone receiving difficult news with composure. He reached into his jacket pocket and took out an envelope and handed it to her. I stopped walking. She took the envelope, held it with both hands, looked at him. Her eyes were bright, in a way that meant she was working not to cry. She said something, 2 words, maybe 3. He shook his head slightly, the way he did when he wanted to say "don't mention it" without actually saying it. I turned away and walked back toward the service station. My hands were not shaking. I want to say that because I'm proud of it. My hands were completely steady, but my mind was running very fast through a corridor of possibilities, none of them with good light. I knew I needed to understand what was in that envelope before the night was over. I refilled my tray. I went back out. For the next hour, I watched him the way I used to watch our children at school, plays from the back of the auditorium, tracking one person in a crowd, tuned to their frequency. He circulated. He listened more than he talked, which was his nature. He introduced himself to a younger woman who turned out to be someone's daughter, 20-something, doing a student journalism project on alumni traditions. He pointed her towards someone across the room. He refilled his own glass once and drank it slowly, standing alone for a few minutes by the window, looking at the dark water of the lake. He looked, I realized, like a man carrying something heavy. I had seen that look before. Once when his brother was ill. Once when he thought we might lose the house. He wore it quietly, the way he wore everything, but I had learned to read it in the architecture of his stillness. At 7:30, there was a brief ceremony. Alumni were asked to come to the front. The current college president spoke for 5 minutes about legacy and community. Then the president of the Alumni Association, one of the men I'd seen my husband standing with earlier, stepped up to the microphone and said they wanted to take a moment to honor a classmate. He said my husband's name. I stood very still against the wall with my empty tray. The alumni president talked for 3 minutes. He talked about a scholarship fund. A fund my husband had apparently been quietly contributing to for 11 years, since a former classmate, a man named David, the first person in his family to attend college, had died of a heart attack at 53, leaving behind a daughter who wanted to go to the same school her father had loved and couldn't afford it. My husband had set up the fund himself. He'd never told the school to publicize it. He'd asked them not to. He'd been giving what I now calculated, doing rough math in my head, was a significant portion of his own retirement savings, year after year, for over a decade. The silver-haired woman in the front row was crying openly now. She was David's wife. The envelope? I looked at the ceiling for a moment. The kind of old plaster ceiling with a medallion at the center, painted white over white over white. I looked at it until I could trust my face. My husband was standing at the microphone now because they'd asked him to say a few words, and he was clearly unprepared for this and clearly uncomfortable. And he said in the slightly formal way he always spoke when he was moved, and trying not to show it, that David had been the kind of person who made you want to be better, not through any particular effort on his part, just by being entirely himself, and that it hadn't seemed right for that to go unmarked. That was all he said. People applauded. He walked back to his seat. He put his hands in his lap and looked at the table. I went into the hallway. I sat on a bench near the coat check for a while. A young man in a staff uniform walked by and asked if I needed anything, and I said no thank you, I just needed a minute, and he nodded and kept walking. I thought about the phone calls in the garage. He'd been talking to the school, probably, to the Alumni Association, planning this ceremony, or rather, being told despite himself that there was going to be one. I thought about the hardware store trips with nothing in his hands. I thought about the plane ticket with only his name. I thought about 38 years. I went back inside. The dinner portion of the evening had begun, and people were finding their seats. I moved through the room with a water pitcher, which gave me reason to approach every table. I was nearly to his table when I heard his phone buzz on the white tablecloth. He glanced at it. His face changed. He stood up, excused himself quietly, and walked toward the lobby. I set down the water pitcher and followed at a distance. He was in the far corner of the lobby, by a row of windows, speaking in a low voice. I walked past him once without stopping, the way you pass a table you don't want to seem interested in. I heard enough. He said, "I know, sweetheart." He said, "I'm sorry I couldn't tell you." He said, I wanted to just, and then his voice dropped and I couldn't hear the rest. Sweetheart. I walked to the restroom and stood at the sink with the water running cold over my wrists. I looked at my own face in the mirror. Carol, volunteer staff, 50 years younger, I would have marched back out there and made a scene. At 62, I had learned that the next thing you do matters more than the last thing that hurt you. I turned off the water. I dried my hands. I walked back out. He was still on the phone but winding down. "I'll explain everything when I get home," he was saying. "I promise. I love you too." I know how that sounds. I know exactly how that sounds. My heart was doing something complicated and fast in my chest. I stood near the registration table and watched him hang up and stand for a moment with the phone in his hand, looking at it, and then he looked up. He looked directly at me. I had 1 second of pure cold panic. Then I realized he wasn't seeing me. He was looking at the general space near the table, the middle distance, the way people look when they're thinking about something else. His eyes moved on. He went back to the dining room. I stood there for a moment longer. Then I walked to the coat check and retrieved my bag and went outside and sat in my car in the staff parking lot and called my daughter. She answered on the second ring, the way she always did when she saw my number at night, the slight alert in her voice that meant she was prepared for bad news and hoping not to receive it. "Mom? Everything okay?" "I need to ask you something," I said, "and I need you to tell me the truth." A pause. "Okay. Did your father call you recently? About something he didn't want me to know about? The pause this time was different, longer, careful. "Mom," she said, "where are you right now?" "Vermont." "Oh," she said. "Oh, Mom." And then she told me. My husband had been planning, for 4 months, a trip. Not the one-way ticket that was for a conference he'd added to the trip. A 2-day professional development thing in Boston he'd booked separately because he was giving a presentation and hadn't wanted to mention it because he'd been asked at the last minute and didn't want me to think. It was a bigger deal than it was. He was going to tell me about Vermont separately. He'd been waiting until he had the full itinerary confirmed. The trip itself, the real trip, was for our anniversary, 38 years in February. He had been planning for 6 months to take me to Italy. Not a long trip, 11 days. Rome, the Amalfi Coast, a small village in Tuscany where his grandfather had been born, a place he had mentioned exactly once in 38 years and thought I had forgotten. I had not forgotten. He had been researching it in the garage because my daughter had helped him set up a separate email account for the bookings, and he checked it on his phone. He'd gone to the hardware store to use the printing kiosk because he didn't want the itinerary pages coming out of our home printer where I might see them. My daughter had known for 3 weeks. Our son had known for 2. They had been, she admitted, very bad at keeping secrets, which was why she answered my calls so quickly at night. "He's going to tell you when he gets home Sunday," she said. He wanted to do it over dinner. He bought a card. He wrote in it, "Mom." He wrote like 2 pages in it. I sat in the parking lot for a long time after we hung up. The sky over the lake was very dark and very clear, and I could see stars in a quantity you never see from our suburb, where the light from everything drowns everything else out. I thought about a man who had been quietly giving away his retirement money for 11 years so that a dead friend's daughter could go to college, who made phone calls in the garage not to hide something from me but to preserve a surprise for me, who drove to a hardware store print kiosk so that a piece of paper wouldn't give away Italy. I thought about the way his face had looked, standing at that microphone, saying that it hadn't seemed right for it to go unmarked. I thought about how little I had known about him, still, after 38 years, not in a frightening way, in the way that you can live next to an ocean your whole life and still be surprised by what it produces on a given morning. I started the car. I drove the 6 miles back to the small motel and sat on the edge of the bed in the room that smelled like cedar and old carpet. I took off the glasses I didn't need. I took out the hair tie. I thought about what kind of woman I had been over the past 2 weeks, building a storm out of clouds, and whether that said something about me that I needed to sit with. I decided it probably did. I also decided that 38 years of building something together gave me the right to be afraid of losing it. That fear was not a character flaw. It was evidence of how much it mattered. In the morning I drove home. 5 hours. The same route, different light a November morning that had decided to be beautiful despite itself, pale gold on the hills. I beat him home by 4 hours. I made dinner. His favorite, the pasta with the lemon cream sauce that takes 45 minutes and uses every pan we own. I set the table properly, with the cloth napkins we only used for company. I put candles on. I had no idea what I was going to say or whether I was going to say anything at all, whether I would simply let him have his dinner and his card and his 2 pages and his moment of telling me, whether I would cry or laugh or both. He came through the door at 6:15. He saw the table. He stopped walking. He looked at me. I looked at him. "I made the lemon pasta," I said. He set down his bag slowly. His face was doing something I had been watching it do for 38 years and still couldn't fully describe. Something that moved through careful and arrived somewhere unguarded. "Okay," he said. "I have something I need to tell you." "Okay," I said. He reached into his bag and took out an envelope. Cream-colored, sealed. He held it for a moment, looked at it, looked at me. He crossed the kitchen and put it on the table in front of me. I picked it up. "Open it after," he said. "After dinner." "Can you wait until after dinner?" I turned the envelope over in my hands. It was heavier than I expected. "I can wait," I said. We ate dinner. We talked about small things first, the drive, the traffic, whether the dog had been limping or if we were imagining it. Then he talked about the ceremony. He told me about David, the whole story this time, From the beginning, from the year they were 19 and sharing a dorm room, and David was learning English as a second language, and my husband had helped him with his papers, and David had taught him to cook 3 things, one of which was the lemon pasta. I had eaten that pasta 100 times and not known. I listened. I did not tell him where I had been. Not that night. Later, sitting with the candles burned down to stubs and the dishes done and the dog on my feet and the envelope open on the table between us, the itinerary spread across the cloth with photographs of Tuscany and the Amalfi Coast, and a small village I recognized from a description he'd given me once, a long time ago, over a table different from this one. I told him, "Not all of it. Enough. The ticket. The worry. The polo shirt. The parking lot and the stars." He was quiet for a long time when I finished. He looked at the tablecloth. Then he looked at me, and in his face I saw something I hadn't expected, which was not offense and not hurt, but a kind of sorrow, the same sorrow I recognized from standing in that lobby, the particular weight of understanding that the people we love most can still be afraid of us in ways we never intended. "I should have told you about the trip," he said. "I thought I was being romantic." "You were being romantic," I said. "I was being a 62-year-old woman who found a mysterious plane ticket in your jacket." He was quiet again. Then he said, "I called to tell our daughter I was ready to propose the Italy idea to you." That's what she heard. That's the sweetheart call. I closed my eyes briefly. He reached across the table and put his hand over mine. His hand was the same hand I had been holding in various configurations for 38 years, and I knew its weight and its warmth exactly. "I should have been more careful," he said. "I should have asked you," I said. We sat there for a while with the candles out and just the kitchen light on and the dog snoring and the itinerary on the table. I thought about all the years we had been learning each other, all the ways we had been wrong and recovered, all the walls that had grown and been quietly taken down again. I thought about David and the scholarship and 11 years of saying nothing. I thought about a man who went to a hardware store to print pages so I wouldn't stumble across them. "You wrote 2 pages in that card," I said. He shifted. It got away from me. I noticed. I turned the card over. The handwriting was his, careful and slightly cramped the way it always was when he was trying to be legible. 2 full pages. I had read them in the hallway after dinner, leaning against the wall, and I was not going to describe what they said because some things belong only to the people they were written for. But I will say that he had remembered the village in Tuscany. He had remembered the one time I mentioned it, 20 years ago, over a different table, in a different kitchen, in a different chapter of our lives, and he had carried it quietly all that time the way he carried everything without show, without annotation, simply holding it until there was a right moment to set it down. "February," I said. "February," he said. Outside, the November wind moved through the yard, through the oak tree we'd planted the year our son was born, which was now taller than the house. I thought about the 38 years it had taken to grow that tree, how we'd watered it without thinking about it most years, just because it was there and it needed water, how it had grown anyway, through drought and hard winters, because that was its nature. "Next time you're planning something," I said, "maybe just a small hint. Not the whole thing. Just enough so I don't end up in Vermont in a polo shirt." He looked at me for a moment. Then he laughed, really laughed, the real one, and I laughed too. And the dog woke up and looked at us with the expression of a creature who has long since accepted that humans are fundamentally mysterious. "A polo shirt," he said. "2 sizes too large," I said. "How was the pasta at the event?" "I was a volunteer, not a guest. I didn't get any pasta." He shook his head slowly, still smiling. "I'm going to be thinking about this for a very long time." "Good," I said. "So will I." I folded the itinerary carefully along the original creases and put it back in the envelope with the card. I would look at it again tomorrow and the day after, and probably many times between now and February. I would think about the Amalfi Coast and a village that existed somewhere in the world with a name I was finally going to learn to pronounce correctly. I would think about what it means to love someone for 38 years and still not know all of them, to still be surprised, to still be wrong sometimes, and forgiven, and to forgive in return. To still, after all of it, sit across a kitchen table from someone and feel that the room is fuller because they are in it. We stayed at that table until the dog demanded his last walk of the night, which was his custom and not negotiable, and then we put on our coats and went outside and walked through our neighborhood in the cold, dark, past the houses with their lit windows, each one its own quiet world. He reached over and took my hand. I let him,